South Africa. Officially, the Republic of South Africa is the southernmost country in Africa. Its 9 provinces are bounded to the south by 2,798 kilometers of coastline that stretches along the South Atlantic and Indian Ocean, to the north by the neighboring countries of Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, and to the east and northeast by Mozambique and Eswatini. It also completely enclaves Lesotho. It is the southernmost country on the mainland of the Old World and the second most populous country located entirely south of the equator, after Tanzania. With over 62 million people, the country is the world's 23rd most populous nation and covers an area of 1,221,037 square kilometers. Pretoria is the administrative capital, while Cape Town, as the seat of parliament, is the legislative capital. Bloemfontein has traditionally been regarded as the judicial capital. The Constitutional Court, the country's highest court, is in Johannesburg. About 80% of the population are black South Africans. The remaining population consists of Africa's largest communities of European, Asian, and multiracial ancestry. South Africa is a multi-ethnic society encompassing a wide variety of cultures, languages, and religions. Its pluralistic makeup is reflected in the Constitution's recognition of 12 official languages, the 4th highest number in the world. According to the 2022 census, the 2 most spoken first languages are Zulu, spoken as a first language by nearly a quarter of the country's population, and Xhosa. The next 2 are of European origin. Afrikaans, developed from Dutch, serves as the first language of most colored and white South Africans, while English reflects the legacy of British colonialism and is commonly used in public and commercial life. Regular elections have been held for almost a century in the country. However, the vast majority of black South Africans were not enfranchised until 1994. During the 20th century, the black majority sought to claim more rights from the dominant white minority, which played a large role in the country's recent history and politics. The National Party imposed apartheid in 1948, institutionalizing previous racial segregation. After a largely nonviolent struggle by the African National Congress and other anti-apartheid activists both inside and outside the country, the repeal of discriminatory laws began in the mid-1980s. Since 1994, all ethnic and linguistic groups have held political representation in the country's liberal democracy, which comprises a parliamentary republic and 9 provinces. South Africa is often referred to as the Rainbow Nation to describe the country's multicultural diversity, especially in the wake of apartheid. According to the 2023 VDem Democracy Indices, it is ranked the 51st electoral democracy worldwide and the 3rd in Africa. South Africa is a middle power in international affairs. It maintains significant regional influence and is a member of BRICS, the African Union, SADC, SACU, the Commonwealth of Nations, and the G20. It is a developing country, ranking 110th on the Human Development Index, the 7th highest on the continent. It has been classified by the World Bank as a newly industrialized country and has the largest and most industrialized, technologically advanced economy in Africa, and the 38th largest economy in the world. South Africa is the only African nation to legislate same-sex marriage. It is tied with Ethiopia for the most UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Africa, and is a biodiversity hotspot, with unique biomes, plant and animal life. Since the end of apartheid, government accountability and quality of life have substantially improved. However, crime, poverty, and inequality remain widespread, with about 40% of the total population being unemployed as of 2021, while some 60% of the population lived below the poverty line and a quarter lived below 2.15 a day. Having the highest Gini coefficient of 63.0, South Africa is considered to be one of, if not the most, unequal countries in the world. History. South Africa contains some of the oldest archaeological and human fossil sites in the world. Archaeologists have recovered extensive fossil remains from a series of caves in Gauteng province. The area, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, has been branded the Cradle of Humankind. The sites include Sterkfontein, one of the richest sites for hominin fossils in the world, as well as Swartkrans, Gondolin Cave, Kromdra, Cooper's Cave, and Malapa. Raymond Dart identified the first hominin fossil discovered in Africa, the Tong child in 1924. Other hominin remains have come from the sites of Makapansgat in Limpopo Province, Cornelia and Florisbad in Free State Province, Border Cave in KwaZulu-Natal Province, Klassies River Caves in Eastern Cape Province, and Pinnacle Point, Elandsfontein, and Dikelders Cave in Western Cape Province. These finds suggest that various hominid species existed in South Africa from about 3 million years ago, starting with Australopithecus africanus, followed by Australopithecus sediba, Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, Homo rhodesiensis, Homo helmae, Homo naldi and modern humans. Modern humans have inhabited southern Africa for at least 170,000 years. Various researchers have located pebble tools within the Vaal River Valley. Bantu expansion. Settlements of Bantu-speaking peoples, who were iron-using agriculturists and herdsmen, were present south of the Limpopo River by the 4th or 5th century CE. They displaced, conquered, and absorbed the original Khoisan, Khoikhoi and San peoples. The Bantu slowly moved south. The earliest iron works in modern-day KwaZulu-Natal province are believed to date from around 1050. The southernmost group was the Xhosa people, whose language incorporates certain linguistic traits from the earlier Khoisan people. The Xhosa reached the Great Fish River, in today's Eastern Cape Province. As they migrated, these larger Iron Age populations displaced or assimilated earlier peoples. In Mpumalanga Province, several stone circles have been found along with a stone arrangement that has been named Adam's Calendar, and the ruins are thought to be created by the Bacone, a northern Soto people. Portuguese exploration. In 1487, the Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias led the first European voyage to land in southern Africa. On December 4, he landed at Walfish Bay. This was south of the furthest point reached in 1485 by his predecessor, the Portuguese navigator Diogo Cao. Dias continued down the western coast of southern Africa. After January 8, 1488, prevented by storms from proceeding along the coast, he sailed out of sight of land and passed the southernmost point of Africa without seeing it. He reached as far up the eastern coast of Africa as, what he called, Rio do Infante, probably the present-day Grode River, in May 1488. On his return he saw the Cape, which he named Cabo das Tormentas. King John II renamed the point Cabo da Boa Esperança, or Cape of Good Hope, as it led to the riches of the East Indies. Dias' feat of navigation was immortalized in Luís de Camões' 1572 epic poem Os Lusíadas. Dutch colonization. By the early 17th century, Portugal's maritime power was starting to decline, and English and Dutch merchants competed to oust Portugal from its lucrative monopoly on the spice trade. Representatives of the British East India Company sporadically called at the Cape in search of provisions as early as 1601 but later came to favor Ascension Island and St. Helena as alternative ports of refuge. Dutch interest was aroused after 1647, when 2 employees of the Dutch East India Company were shipwrecked at the Cape for several months. The sailors were able to survive by obtaining fresh water and meat from the natives. They also sowed vegetables in the fertile soil. Upon their return to Holland, they reported favorably on the Cape's potential as a warehouse and garden for provisions to stock passing ships for long voyages. In 1652, a century and a half after the discovery of the Cape Sea route, Jan van Riebeeck established a victualling station at the Cape of Good Hope, at what would become Cape Town, on behalf of the Dutch East India Company. In time, the Cape became home to a large population of Vrijleden, also known as Vrijburgers, former company employees who stayed in Dutch territories overseas after serving their contracts. Dutch traders also brought thousands of enslaved people to the fledgling colony from Indonesia, Madagascar, and parts of eastern Africa. Some of the earliest mixed-race communities in the country were formed between Vrijburgers, enslaved people, and indigenous peoples. This led to the development of a new ethnic group, the Cape-colored S, most of whom adopted the Dutch language and Christian faith. The eastward expansion of Dutch colonists ushered in a series of wars with the southwesterly migrating Xhosa tribe, known as the Xhosa Wars, as both sides competed for the pasture land near the Great Fish River, which the colonists desired for grazing cattle. Vrijburgers who became independent farmers on the frontier were known as Boers, with some adopting semi-nomadic lifestyles being denoted as trek Boers. The Boers formed loose militias, which they termed commandos, and forged alliances with Khoisan peoples to repel Xhosa raids. Both sides launched bloody but inconclusive offensives, and sporadic violence, often accompanied by livestock theft, remained common for several decades. British colonization and the Great Trek. Great Britain occupied Cape Town between 1795 and 1803 to prevent it from falling under the control of the French First Republic, which had invaded the Low Countries. After briefly returning to Dutch rule under the Batavian Republic in 1803, the Cape was occupied again by the British in 1806. Following the end of the Napoleonic Wars, it was formally ceded to Great Britain and became an integral part of the British Empire. British emigration to South Africa began around 1818, subsequently culminating in the arrival of the 1820 settlers. The new colonists were induced to settle for a variety of reasons, namely to increase the size of the European workforce and to bolster frontier regions against Xhosa incursions. In the first 2 decades of the 19th century, the Zulu people grew in power and expanded their territory under their leader, Shaka. Shaka's warfare indirectly led to the Mfecane, in which 1 to 2 million people were killed and the inland plateau was devastated and depopulated in the early 1820s. An offshoot of the Zulu, the Matabele people created a larger empire that included large parts of the Highveld under their king Mzilikazi. During the early 19th century, many Dutch settlers departed from the Cape Colony, where they had been subjected to British control, in a series of migrant groups who came to be known as voortrekkers, meaning pathfinders, or pioneers. They migrated to the future Natal, Free State, and Transvaal regions. The Boers founded the Boer Republics, the South African Republic, the Natalia Republic, and the Orange Free State. The discovery of diamonds in 1867 and gold in 1884 in the interior started the mineral revolution and increased economic growth and immigration. This intensified British subjugation of the indigenous people. The struggle to control these important economic resources was a factor in relations between Europeans and the indigenous population and also between the Boers and the British. On May 16, 1876, President Thomas Francois Burgers of the South African Republic declared war against the petty people. King Sekhukhune managed to defeat the army on August 1, 1876. Another attack by the Lydenburg Volunteer Corps was also repulsed. On February 16, 1877, the two parties signed a peace treaty at Botswana. The Boers' inability to subdue the petty led to the departure of burghers in favor of Paul Kruger and the British annexation of the South African Republic. In 1878 and 1879 3 British attacks were successfully repelled until Garnet Wolseley defeated Sekhukhune in November 1879 with an army of 2,000 British soldiers, Boers, and 10,000 Swazis. The Anglo-Zulu War was fought in 1879 between the British and the Zulu Kingdom. Following Lord Carnarvon's successful introduction of federation in Canada, it was thought that similar political effort, coupled with military campaigns, might succeed with the African kingdoms, tribal areas, and Boer republics in South Africa. In 1874, Henry Bartle Frere was sent to South Africa as the British High Commissioner to bring such plans into being. Among the obstacles were the presence of the independent states of the Boers, and the Zulu Land Army. The Zulu nation defeated the British at the Battle of Isandlwana. Eventually Zululand lost the war, resulting in the termination of the Zulu nation's independence. Boer Wars. The Boer republics successfully resisted British encroachments during the First Boer War using guerrilla warfare tactics, which were well suited to local conditions. The British returned with greater numbers, more experience, and new strategy in the Second Boer War, and although suffering heavy casualties due to Boer attrition warfare, they were ultimately successful due in part to scorched earth tactics such as concentration camps, in which 27,000 Boer civilians died due to a combination of disease and neglect. South Africa's urban population grew rapidly from the end of the 19th century onward. After the devastation of the wars, Dutch-descendant Boer farmers fled into cities from the devastated Transvaal and Orange Free State territories to become the class of the white urban poor. Independence. Anti-British policies among white South Africans focused on independence. During the Dutch and British colonial years, racial segregation was mostly informal, though some legislation was enacted to control the settlement and movement of indigenous people, including the Native Location Act of 1879 and the system of pass laws. 8 years after the end of the Second Boer War and after 4 years of negotiation, the South Africa Act 1909 granted nominal independence while creating the Union of South Africa on May 31, 1910. The Union was a dominion that included the former territories of the Cape, Transvaal, and Natal colonies, as well as the Orange Free State Republic. The Natives Land Act of 1913 severely restricted the ownership of land by blacks. At that stage they controlled only 7% of the country. The amount of land reserved for indigenous peoples was later marginally increased. In 1931, the Union became fully sovereign from the United Kingdom with the passage of the Statute of Westminster, which abolished the last powers of the Parliament of the United Kingdom to legislate in the country. Only 3 other African countries, Liberia, Ethiopia, and Egypt, had been independent prior to that point. In 1934, the South African Party and National Party merged to form the United Party, seeking reconciliation between Afrikaners and English-speaking whites. In 1939, the party split over the entry of the Union into World War II, as an ally of the United Kingdom, a move which National Party followers opposed. Apartheid era. In 1948, the National Party was elected to power. It strengthened the racial segregation begun under Dutch and British colonial rule. Taking Canada's Indian Act as a framework, the nationalist government classified all peoples into 3 races and developed rights and limitations for each. The white minority, less than 20%, controlled the vastly larger black majority. The legally institutionalized segregation became known as apartheid. While whites enjoyed the highest standard of living in all of Africa, comparable to First World Western nations, the black majority remained disadvantaged by almost every standard, including income, education, housing, and life expectancy. The Freedom Charter, adopted in 1955 by the Congress Alliance, demanded a non-racial society and an end to discrimination. On May 31, 1961, the country became a republic following a referendum which narrowly passed. The British-dominated Natal province largely voted against the proposal. Elizabeth II lost the title Queen of South Africa, and the last Governor-General, Charles Robert Swart, became state president. As a concession to the Westminster system, the appointment of the president remained an appointment by Parliament and was virtually powerless until P. W. Botha's Constitution Act of 1983, which eliminated the office of Prime Minister and instated a unique strong presidency responsible to Parliament. Pressured by other Commonwealth of Nations countries, South Africa withdrew from the organization in 1961 and rejoined it in 1994. Despite opposition to apartheid both within and outside the country, the government legislated for a continuation of apartheid. The security forces cracked down on internal dissent, and violence became widespread, with anti-apartheid organizations such as the African National Congress, the Azanian People's Organization, and the Pan-Africanist Congress carrying out guerrilla warfare and urban sabotage. The three rival resistance movements also engaged in occasional interfactional clashes as they jockeyed for domestic influence. Apartheid became increasingly controversial, and several countries began to boycott business with the South African government because of its racial policies. These measures were later extended to international sanctions and the divestment of holdings by foreign investors. Post-apartheid. The Malabutini Declaration of Faith, signed by Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Harry Swartz in 1974, enshrined the principles of peaceful transition of power and equality for all, the first of such agreements by black and white political leaders in South Africa. Ultimately, F.W. de Klerk opened bilateral discussions with Nelson Mandela in 1993 for a transition of policies and government. In 1990, the National Party government took the first step towards dismantling discrimination when it lifted the ban on the ANC and other political organizations. It released Nelson Mandela from prison after 27 years of serving a sentence for sabotage. A negotiation process followed. With approval from the white electorate in a 1992 referendum, the government continued negotiations to end apartheid. South Africa held its first universal elections in 1994, which the ANC won by an overwhelming majority. It has been in power ever since. The country rejoined the Commonwealth of Nations and became a member of the Southern African Development Community. In post-apartheid South Africa, unemployment remained high. While many blacks have risen to middle or upper classes, the overall unemployment rate of black people worsened between 1994 and 2003 by official metrics but declined significantly using expanded definitions. Poverty among whites, which was previously rare, increased. The government struggled to achieve the monetary and fiscal discipline to ensure both redistribution of wealth and economic growth. The United Nations Human Development Index rose steadily until the mid-1990s, then fell from 1995 to 2005 before recovering its 1995 peak in 2013. The fall is in large part attributable to the South African HIV/AIDS pandemic, which saw South African life expectancy fall from a high point of 62 years in 1992 to a low of 53 in 2005. And the failure of the government to take steps to address the pandemic in its early years. In May 2008, riots left over 60 people dead. The Center on Housing Rights and Evictions estimated that over 100,000 people were driven from their homes. The targets were mainly legal and illegal migrants, and refugees seeking asylum, but a third of the victims were South African citizens. In a 2006 survey, the South African Migration Project concluded that South Africans are more opposed to immigration than any other national group. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees in 2008 reported over 200,000 refugees applied for asylum in South Africa, almost 4 times as many as the year before. These people were mainly from Zimbabwe, though many also come from Burundi, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Rwanda, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Competition over jobs, business opportunities, public services, and housing has led to tension between refugees and host communities. While xenophobia in South Africa is still a problem, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in 2011 reported that recent violence had not been as widespread as initially feared. Nevertheless, as South Africa continues to grapple with racial issues, one of the proposed solutions has been to pass legislation, such as the pending Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill, to uphold South Africa's ban on racism and commitment to equality. On February 14, 2018, Jacob Zuma resigned the presidency. Since February 15, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa has been president of South Africa. On March 16, 2018, just over a month after President Jacob Zuma resigned from the presidency, National Director of Public Prosecutions Sean Abrahams announced that Zuma would again face prosecution on 16 criminal charges, 12 charges of fraud, 2 of corruption, and 1 each of racketeering and money laundering, just as in the 2006 indictment. A warrant was issued for his arrest in February 2020 after he failed to appear in court. In 2021 he was found guilty of contempt of court and sentenced to 15 months imprisonment. In response, supporters of Zuma engaged in protests which led to riots, looting, vandalism and widespread violence, leaving 354 people dead. South Africa has been undergoing a period of intense political and economic crisis since 2020, with growing numbers of international institutions, businesses, and political figures warning that the country risks collapsing into a failed state due to high unemployment, low economic growth, low business investment, rising levels of violent crime, disorder, political corruption, and state capture. The country been undergoing an energy crisis since 2007, resulting in routine rolling electricity blackouts due to load shedding. According to the International Monetary Fund, South Africa is suffering from massive corruption and state capture. The Zondo Commission, established in 2018 in order to investigate allegations of corruption and state capture, released its findings in 2022. It found rampant corruption at every level of government, including Transnet, Eskom, and Enel, as well as law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and the civil service. It documented evidence of systemic corruption, fraud, racketeering, bribery, money laundering, and state capture. It investigated the African National Congress Party and Jacob Zuma, whom it concluded were complicit in state capture through their direct assistance to the Gupta family. The commission estimated the total amount of money spent by the state which was tainted by state capture to be around R57 billion. More than 97% of the R57 billion came from Transnet and Eskom. Out of these funds, the Gupta enterprise received at least R15 billion. The total loss to the state is difficult to quantify, but would far exceed that R15 billion. South Africa has maintained a position of neutrality in regards to the Russia invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the ongoing war. On December 29, 2023, South Africa formally submitted its case to the International Court of Justice regarding Israel's conduct in the Gaza Strip as part of the Israel-Hamas war, alleging that Israel had committed and was committing genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. South Africa has repeatedly hosted senior leaders of Hamas, the group responsible for the October 7 massacre in Israel. Following the 2024 general elections, the African National Congress saw its share of the national vote fall below 50% for the first time since the end of apartheid. though it remained the single largest party in the South African parliament. President Ramaphosa announced a national unity government, the first since the cabinet of Nelson Mandela, and entered a deal with the Democratic Alliance, the previous main opposition party, and other minor parties. Ramaphosa was re-elected for a second term in office by the National Assembly against the leader of the economic freedom fighters, Julius Malema. Languages. South Africa has 12 official languages: Zulu, Xhosa, Afrikaans, English, Pedi, Tswana, Southern Soto, Xitsonga, Swazi, Venda, and Southern Ndebele in order of first language speakers, as well as South African Sign Language, which was recognized as an official language in 2023. In this regard it is fourth only to Bolivia, India, and Zimbabwe in number. While all the languages are formally equal, some languages are spoken more than others. According to the 2022 census, the three most spoken first languages are Zulu, Xhosa, and Afrikaans. Although English is recognized as the language of commerce and science, it is only the fifth most common home language, that of only 9% of South Africans in 2022. Nevertheless, it has become the de facto lingua franca of the nation. Estimates based on the 1991 census suggest just under half of South Africans could speak English. It is the second most commonly spoken language outside of the household, after Zulu. Other languages are spoken, or were widely used previously, including Fana Galo, Khoi, Lobdu, Nama, Northern Ndebele, and Futha. Many of the unofficial languages of the San and Khoekhoe peoples contain regional dialects stretching northwards into Namibia and Botswana, and elsewhere. These people, who are a physically distinct population from the Bantu people who make up most of the black Africans in South Africa, have their own cultural identity based on their hunter-gatherer societies. They have been marginalized, and the remainder of their languages are in danger of becoming extinct. White South Africans may also speak European languages, including Italian, Portuguese also spoken by Black Angolans and Mozambicans, Dutch, German, and Greek, while some Indian South Africans and more recent migrants from South Asia speak Indian languages, such as Gujarati, Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, and Urdu. French is spoken by migrants from Francophone Africa. Religion. According to the 2001 census, Christians accounted for 80% of the population, with a majority of them being members of various Protestant denominations broadly defined to include syncretic African-initiated churches and a minority of Roman Catholics and other Christians. Christian category includes Zion Christian, Pentecostal, Roman Catholic, Methodist, Dutch Reformed, and Anglican. Members of remaining Christian churches accounted for another 36% of the population. Muslims accounted for 1.5% of the population, Hindus 1%, traditional African religions 0.5%, Judaism 0.2%, and 15% had no religious affiliation. African-initiated churches formed the largest of the Christian groups. It was believed that many of the persons who claimed no affiliation with any organized religion adhered to a traditional African religion. There are an estimated 200,000 traditional healers, and up to 60% of South Africans consult these healers, generally called Sangoma or Inyanga. These healers use a combination of ancestral spiritual beliefs and a belief in the spiritual and medicinal properties of local fauna, flora, and fungi commonly known as muti, to facilitate healing in clients. Many peoples have syncretic religious practices combining Christian and indigenous influences. South African Muslims comprise mainly colored and Indians. They have been joined by black or white South African converts as well as those from other parts of Africa. South African Muslims describe their faith as the fastest growing religion of conversion in the country, with the number of black Muslims growing six-fold, from 12,000 in 1991 to 74,700 in 2004. There is a substantial Jewish population, descended from European Jews who arrived as a minority among other European settlers. This population peaked in the 1970s at 118,000, though only around 75,000 remain today, the rest having emigrated, mostly to Israel. Even so, these numbers make the Jewish community in South Africa the 12th largest in the world. Foreign relations. As the Union of South Africa, the country was a founding member of the United Nations, with Prime Minister Jan Smuts writing the preamble to the UN Charter. South Africa is one of the founding members of the African Union and has the third largest economy of all the members. It is a founding member of the OAS New Partnership for Africa's Development. After apartheid ended, South Africa was readmitted to the Commonwealth of Nations. The country is a member of the Group of 77 and chaired the organization in 2006. South Africa is also a member of the Southern African Development Community, South Atlantic Peace and Cooperation Zone, Southern African Customs Union, Antarctic Treaty System, World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, G20, G8+5, and the Port Management Association of Eastern and Southern Africa. South Africa has played a key role as a mediator in African conflicts over the last decade, such as in Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Comoros, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. President Jacob Zuma and Chinese President Hu Jintao upgraded bilateral ties between the two countries in 2010 when they signed the Beijing Agreement, which elevated South Africa's earlier strategic partnership with China to the higher level of comprehensive strategic partnership in both economic and political affairs, including the strengthening of exchanges between their respective ruling parties and legislatures. In 2011, South Africa joined the Brazil-Russia-India-China grouping of countries, identified by Zuma as the country's largest trading partners and also the largest trading partners with Africa as a whole. Zuma asserted that BRICS member countries would also work with each other through the UN, G20, and the India-Brazil-South Africa Forum. Economy. South Africa has a mixed economy. South Africa is the economic nucleus of Africa. The country's economy is the most industrialized and technologically advanced in Africa respectively, and has the largest economy in Africa. It also has a relatively high gross domestic product per capita compared to other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. US $16,080 at purchasing power parity as of 2023, ranked 95th. Despite this, South Africa is still burdened by a relatively high rate of poverty and unemployment and is ranked in the top 10 countries in the world for income inequality, measured by the Gini coefficient. South Africa is ranked 40th by total wealth, making it the second wealthiest country in Africa. In terms of private wealth, South Africa has a private wealth of 651 billion, making South Africa's population the richest in Africa, followed by Egypt with 307 billion and Nigeria with 228 billion. Approximately 55% of the population is living in poverty at the national upper poverty line, while a total of 13.8 million people are experiencing food poverty. In 2015, 71% of net wealth are held by 10% of the population, whereas 60% of the population held only 7% of the net wealth, and the Gini coefficient was 0.5. Unlike most of the world's poor countries, South Africa does not have a thriving informal economy. Only 15% of South African jobs are in the informal sector, compared with around half in Brazil and India and nearly 3/4 in Indonesia. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development attributes this difference to South Africa's widespread welfare system. World Bank research shows that South Africa has one of the widest gaps between per capita GDP versus its Human Development Index ranking, with only Botswana showing a larger gap. After 1994, government policy brought down inflation, stabilized public finances, and some foreign capital was attracted. However, growth was still subpar. From 2004 onward, economic growth picked up significantly, both employment and capital formation increased. During the presidency of Jacob Zuma, the government increased the role of state-owned enterprises. Some of the biggest SOEs are Eskom, the electric power monopoly, South African Airways, and Transnet, the railroad and ports monopoly. Some of these SOEs have not been profitable, such as SAA, which has required bailouts totaling R30 billion over the 20 years preceding 2015. Principal international trading partners of South Africa besides other African countries include Germany, the United States, China, Japan, the United Kingdom and Spain. The 2020 Financial Secrecy Index ranks South Africa as the 58th safest tax haven in the world. The South African agricultural industry contributes around 10% of formal employment, relatively low compared to other parts of Africa, as well as providing work for casual laborers and contributing around 2.5% of GDP for the nation. Due to the aridity of the land, only 13.5% can be used for crop production, and only 3% is considered high potential land. In August 2013, South Africa was ranked as the top African country of the future by FDI Intelligence based on the country's economic potential, labor environment, cost-effectiveness, infrastructure, business friendliness, and foreign direct investment strategy. Culture. The South African black majority still has a substantial number of rural inhabitants who lead largely impoverished lives. It is among these people that cultural traditions survive most strongly. As blacks have become increasingly urbanized and westernized, aspects of traditional culture have declined. Members of the middle class, who have historically been predominantly white but whose ranks include growing numbers of black, colored, and Indian people, have lifestyles similar in many respects to that of people found in Western Europe, North America, and Australasia. The South African media sector is large, and South Africa is one of Africa's major media centers. While the many broadcasters and publications reflect the diversity of the population as a whole, the most commonly used language is English. However, all 10 other official languages are represented to some extent or another. There is great diversity in South African music. Black musicians have developed unique styles called Kwaito and Amapiano, that is said to have taken over radio, television, and magazines. Of note is Brenda Fassie, who launched to fame with her song Weekend Special, which was sung in English. More famous traditional musicians include Ladysmith Black Mambazo, while the Soweto String Quartet performs classical music with an African flavor. South Africa has produced world-famous jazz musicians, notably Hugh Masekela, Jonas Gwangwe, Abdullah Ibrahim, Miriam Makeba, Jonathan Butler, Chris McGregor, and Sathima Bea Benjamin. Afrikaans music covers multiple genres, such as the contemporary Steve Hofmeyr, the punk rock band Fokafpala Seeker, and the singer-songwriter Jeremy Loop. South African popular musicians that have found international success include Manfred Mann, Johnny Clegg, rap-rave duo Die Antwoord, Tyla, and rock band Seether. Rappers such as aka, Nasty C, and Casper Nyovest gained notoriety in other avenues like the BET Awards for Best African Acts. Although few South African film productions are known outside South Africa, many foreign films have been produced about South Africa. Arguably, the most high-profile film portraying South Africa in recent years was District 9 and its upcoming sequel, as well as Chapi. Other notable exceptions are the film Xatsi, which won the Academy Award for Foreign Language Film at the 78th Academy Awards in 2006, as well as Ukarman Ike Alitshaw, which won the Golden Bear at the 2005 Berlin International Film Festival. In 2015, the Oliver Hermanus film The Endless River became the first South African film selected for the Venice Film Festival. Cuisine. The cuisine of South Africa is diverse, and foods from many different cultures and backgrounds are enjoyed by all communities, and especially marketed to tourists who wish to sample the large variety available. The cuisine is mostly meat-based and has spawned the distinctively South African social gathering known as the braai, a variation of the barbecue. South Africa has also developed into a major wine producer, with some of the best vineyards lying in valleys around Stellenbosch, Franschhoek, Paarl, and Berrydale. Sports. South Africa's most popular sports are association football, rugby union, and cricket. Other sports with significant support are swimming, athletics, golf, boxing, tennis, rugby league, ringball, field hockey, surfing and netball. Although football commands the greatest following among the youth, other sports like basketball, judo, softball, and skateboarding are becoming increasingly popular amongst the populace. Association football is the most popular sport in South Africa. Footballers who have played for major foreign clubs include Stephen Pienaar, Lucas Radebe, Philemon Masinga, Benny McCarthy, Aaron Mokoena, and Delrone Buckley. South Africa hosted the 2010 FIFA World Cup, and FIFA President Sepp Blatter awarded South Africa a grade 9 out of 10 for successfully hosting the event. Player Benny McCarthy is also a first-team coach for the English football club Manchester United. It hosted the 1996 African Cup of Nations, with the national team Bafana going on to win the tournament. In 2022, the women's team also won the Women's Africa Cup of Nations, beating Morocco 2-1 in the final. The women's team went on to reach the last 16 at the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup, beating Italy and tying with Argentina in the group stage. Famous combat sport personalities include Baby Jake Jacob Matlala, Mvweni Bong, Welcome Nsita, Dingon Thobela, Corey Sanders, Jerry Cutsey, Brian Mitchell, and Dricus du Plessis. Durban surfer Jordy Smith won the 2010 Billabong J-Bay Open, making him the highest-ranked surfer in the world. South Africa produced Formula One motor racing's 1979 world champion Jody Scheckter. Famous active Grand Prix motorcycle racing personalities include Brad Binder and his younger brother Darren Binder. Well-known active cricket players include Kagiso Rabada, David Miller, Keshav Maharaj, Quinton de Kock, Lunginjiti, Anrik Norge, Aiden Markram, and Faf du Plessis. Some also participate in the Indian Premier League. South Africa has produced numerous world-class rugby players, including Francois Pienaar, Joost van der Westhuizen, John Smit, O.S. Durant, Jean de Villiers, Chester Williams, Frans Steyn, Victor Matfield, Brian Habana, Tendame Tawarira, Ebenezer Beath, Cheslin Colby, and Siya Kolisi. South Africa has won the Rugby World Cup 4 times, the most wins of any country. South Africa first won the 1995 Rugby World Cup, which it hosted. They went on to win the tournament again in 2007, 2019 and 2023. Cricket is one of the most played sports in South Africa. It has hosted the 2003 Cricket World Cup, the 2007 World 2020 Championship. South Africa's national cricket team, the Proteas, have also won the inaugural edition of the 1998 ICC Knockout Trophy by defeating West Indies in the final. The 2023 ICC Women's T20 World Cup was hosted in South Africa and the women's team won silver. The men's team won silver at the 2024 ICC T20 World Cup. South Africa's national blind cricket team also went on to win the inaugural edition of the Blind Cricket World Cup in 1998. In 2004, the swimming team of Roland Schoeman, Lyndon Ferns, Darian Townsend, and RYK Neethling won the gold medal at the Olympic Games in Athens, simultaneously breaking the world record in the 4x100 freestyle relay. Penny Haynes won Olympic gold in the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Games, and more recently, swimmers Tajana Smith, Lara van Niekerk, Akani Simbine, and Wade van Niekerk have all broken records and won medals at both the Olympic and Commonwealth Games, with Wade van Niekerk being the world record holder in 400 meters since 2016. In 2012, Oscar Pistorius became the first double amputee sprinter to compete at the Olympic Games in London.